That's right. I'm David Crystal. I'm technically an honorary professor of linguistics at the University of Bangor in Wales, but I work from my home in Holyhead as a kind of freelance, independent academic, which gives me time to write books, unlike many colleagues in the university world where they just don't have the time. So I write books on all aspects of language, English language in particular. And here at Edinburgh this time I'm talking about two recent books that have come out in this area, one on dialect and the other on accent. So they're sort of two sides of one coin, really. You know, they're both about identity, who you are, where you're from. Dialect is when you're talking about words and grammar and how that shows where you're from. Accent, of course, is pronunciation. So one book is called The Disappearing Dictionary, which is all about a dictionary that came out 100 years ago that people have forgotten about, but they shouldn't have forgotten about it. And the other is called You Say Potato, because of the film. You remember the film? How many of my viewers will remember that amazing Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers film from the 20s, 30s, where they sing the song, you know, you say potato and I say potato, maybe, and they have a long dialogue about whether they speak the same accent or whether they should get married at all. And so we, let's call the whole thing off, it was called. And so we called the book You Say Potato. Yes, writing with your son is a really interesting experience. I think probably writing with any member of your family is. I mean, it's great until he's right and I'm wrong, you know. I mean, I should be right, shouldn't I? I mean, I'm the father. I taught him everything he knew. No. And so there were lots of argument is perhaps the right word, but I don't mean that in a kind of nasty sense. So we spend a lot of time just bouncing off each other. Because you see, when you write a book about accents, it's absolutely crucial that you have a generation difference. No one person can write a book about accents because, you know, at my age, I've got my accent background, which is, you know, that of a chap in his, 40s, as it were, 70s, all right. But Ben, you see, is in his 30s, so he's got a completely different accent background. So we start the book by him coming into the house one day and saying that he had a bad schedule in school, and I pick him up on this and say, Ben, it's schedule. He says, no, it's schedule. And that's the kind of, you know, bouncing off each other that can drive a book forward, and we built that into the writing process. He would write his sections and send them to me. I would write my, because he's an actor and director and a Shakespeare guy mainly, and so we have two very different worlds here. And so we would sort of read each other's stuff, but then when we actually started to put the book together, it was amazing how often the text that we'd written in advance changed simply because the process of simply talking about it together introduced all kinds of new variations. The study of language has changed dramatically simply because language has changed so dramatically. I mean, in the 1990s, three big things happened that changed the course of language study forever. The first was that English became a global language. Suddenly, all over the world, people were learning English. It's always been pretty global, but suddenly it became truly global. Well, gosh, you know, there's never been a global language like that before. The second big thing we discovered in the 90s was how many languages of the world are dying. You know, there are 6,000 odd languages in the world. Half of them are so seriously endangered that they're not going to last the present century. They're going to die out. Well, that was an amazing realization that changed the way in which people thought about language. And then the third thing, of course, and the one that anybody under the age of sort of 30 now knows isn't news anymore, was the arrival of the internet. Suddenly, everything that we used to know about the spoken language and the written language was now online, with all the changes that kind of medium introduces to us. So everything had to be rethought. You know, whatever you thought before about vocabulary and grammar and pronunciation and spelling and punctuation, suddenly online it was different. You know, emails without any punctuation in, text messages with all sorts of crazy abbreviations. All this sort of thing suddenly happened. So as a result, in the past 20 years, the subject is completely unlike the subject I knew when I was, you know, growing up in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And that makes it, of course, one of the most exciting things of all. People often ask me, what is the most exciting thing about language? And I say, because it's going to change tomorrow. You know, whatever English is like today, it was different yesterday, it'll be different tomorrow, and that's the best bit. Yes, I've been to the Edinburgh Book Festival, I don't know how many times now, perhaps 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times over the years. At the beginning it was just me, and then last year I was here with my wife Hilary. We wrote a book together called Wordsmiths and Warriors, an English language tourist guide to Britain, so we were both on stage. And then a few years ago I was here on stage with Ben, because we'd done a joint book together on Shakespeare, the Shakespeare Miscellany. And now we're back here again with Ben and me doing the accents book, and Hilary very much around because, well, we're business partners as well as husband and wife, and as I often say, you know, everybody needs a Hilary because she is immensely valuable as a partner, as a business partner, but as somebody who will always read my stuff, and I read hers. She's a writer in her own right these days. She writes children's novels, and so there's a kind of fruitful interaction that comes. And when you're in an atmosphere like this, which is just everybody is saying, in effect, without actually saying so, read and write. It's just in the air. You can touch it almost. Then this is where you get your best ideas, you know, and you bump into people that you've met on previous festivals here, and they're a year older or 2 years older, but they're the same people and they've got new ideas, and it's just the most exciting environment for a writer or a reader to be.
Well, yes, I've got quite a long ago connection. I did linguistics masters at Reading University, and David Crystal was my lecturer. And I was the only speech and language therapist at that time, and we did a lot of work together on language. And it took me back, this particular talk, because I remember him giving lectures on dialect, and I was the only Scot at that time on the course. So they used me as a guinea pig. They used to get me to say, you know, words, and then he would pick it up and discuss it. So it was a fantastic talk. I really enjoyed it. I also thought the fact that he had his son involved made it very, you know, it brought it to life even more, but it's well worth listening to. Very good, very entertaining. He makes it sound so interesting. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Yeah, just the fun between the two of them and the examples of the different dialects that they could both give. I mean, that just made the whole thing come to life. Yes.
It was absolutely fantastic. It was really entertaining and very interesting and informative. It was very interesting to learn about the Shakespearean form of English that they were talking about and kind of displaying for us.
Well, I'd read the book and it was talking about accents and things, so it seemed really interesting. Like, there are a lot of people who think that you should only speak in received pronunciation or correct English, as they talk about in the book. And I'm quite interested in promoting diversity and how it affects identity and things, so it's quite interesting too. The best bit for me was probably when they read Shakespeare in the original pronunciation. It had much more of an effect than just reading it in standardized English pronunciation. So I think it's quite difficult to translate an accent. Like, if you speak in a certain accent in the UK, it definitely has an impact on how you perceive someone, what you think about their background. And to find something in a different culture, in a different language that corresponds perfectly to that background is quite impossible, but it's an interesting challenge to work on. We've been to some of the translation duels to see the translations compared, and I think we're just going to keep seeing what's happening, really. It's really interesting. It was really interesting. The best bit for me probably was realising that there are literary translators out there. Like, everybody tells you don't go into literary translation, you can't make a living that way. So it was really good to see that people are actually still striving for that, still working on that kind of project.